So assuming you have Anaconda installed, let's launch Jupyter Notebook. And let's go to the folder in our system where we want to save our work. So I'll create a new folder. Click Tutorial, and we want to open a new Python file in this folder. So before we do anything, let me show you how to print stuff in Python. So we use the function print, and in between quotes we can write hello world. And if we want to execute this, we press run. Anything in between double quotes is called a string. We can also print numbers. Let's run this. And you see we get our 8. And when we're dealing with integers, we don't put any quotes around it. Now let's go into variables. And a variable is used to store values, which we can use later. And it is created when we add an equal sign to it. So to assign values to a variable, let's create a variable x equals 20. Let's run this. And now if we want to print x, we just write x and click run, and we get our 20. We can also override variables. So let's say x equals, and you want to put in a string, Namibia. Let's run this and print for x, and you see we get Namibia. We can also add two variables if the variable is set to an integer. So let's do x equals 10 and y equals 20. So we can say x plus y, and we should get 30. We can also do x times y. Let's run this, 200, x minus y, and so on. We'll get into operators later on in this tutorial. We can also concatenate variables. So let me just write some notes to concatenate variables. And this is a comment. This is how you comment out text or code in Python. When we comment it with a pound sign. And what this will do is make sure that anything that's commented out doesn't get rendered. So now let's concatenate two variables. Let's go message1 equals hello everybody. And let's set message2 to we're learning something. Let me take this out. So in order to add these two together, we call our message1 variable and we add message2 variable. And let's run this. And you see it joins our variables, but we should put a space between these two variables. So the way we do that, we just add a string with empty spaces. We add a space, and then we add our addition sign. And let's run this, and you see we get the space that we want. Now let's move on to data types. And we spoke a little bit about some of the data types. And the ones we talk about were string, which is anything between single or double quotes. So this is a string. We also went through integers, and an integer is just a common numbers. Then there's also something called floats, and this is a decimal. So let's just give an example of a decimal. And then we have Boolean values. And what Boolean values means is true or false values. So let's run this. And if we want to see the type of data that's stored in a variable, we can use the type function. So type and X, and you see it gives us that this is a string. Let's go type Y. Let's run this, and it's an integer. Let's type, let me make another variable for this. So B. So type Z, and it should show us the reason why it's giving us a bool is because we need to run this cell again. So let's run it. And now let's run this one, and type Z should give us float. And then if we use the type function, give us B, it should give us a Boolean data type. And as you see here, we get bool. We can also find the type of a string if it's not set to any variable. So another string. And this should give us the string data type. So now let's move deeper on into strings. And a string is made up of one or more characters and is either surrounded by single quotes or double quotes. So we briefly went over this previously. So let's set some strings into our variables. Hi, my name is John. Let's set another variable to I live in Namibia. So let's run these. And if we want to access any elements in this string, we use block brackets. And in between the block brackets, we put an index number. So in a string, indexing starts from 0. So the value H would be 0, I would be 1, the space in between would be 2, M would be 3, Y would be 4, and so on. So just remember that when counting indexes, it starts with 0. So let's say I want to get the 0, 1, 2, 3, the M in this string. We'll call our variable with block brackets. And we said the M is 0, 1, 2, 3. We write 3 in between our block brackets, and we should get M. And here you see we got M. Let's try 6 to get the N in name. And you see we got N. To print a range in a string, print a range from a string. So let's say I want to print from the 0 index to 3 to the 4th index. So I want to get from I to V. We would call our variable, we put the block brackets, and we put the index where we want to start from. So we want to start from 0 to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But we have to put 5 so that it can print out the V. So we put 5. Let's run this. And you see it prints index from 0 to 5. To return the length of a string, we use the length function. So let's do this. Let's say we want to get the length of A. We write L, and in between the length function, and in between we call the variable where we have our string stored, and then we get 18. Let's also do for B to find out the length, and that's 16. If to remove white spaces from the beginning of and the end of a string, we use the strip method. So the way how we do this, let's say we want to create a string. Hello everybody. And there's spaces in the beginning and the end. So let's just print out our variable and we see we get spaces in between. We simply use our strip method. So we call in our variable, we put a period, strip, and let's execute this. And it removed the blank spaces from the beginning of the end of the text. To return a string in lowercase, we use the lower method. So let's set a variable to caps, hello everybody. Oh, the reason why we get this message is because I called a capital C instead of lowercase c. Variables are case sensitive. So I have to call a lowercase c. And then I should get hello everybody. And now to change this into lowercase, we use the c dot lower. Let's run this. And you see it converts our string to lower. To convert a string to capitals, let's print this to see that we replaced our variable c. We will use the upper to capitalize all the words in a string. Upper function. Let's run this. And you see hello everyone. So let's say we want to replace a string with another string. We use the replace method. So let's create a variable called sensei. Create a variable and say hello everyone. I'll just type hello everyone, how is everything? And let's call out our variable. Hello everyone, how's everything? Let's call out our variable and we want to replace hello with hi. So it takes two arguments, and in the first arguments we write what we want to replace. So we want to replace hello. We put a comma, and then the next argument is what we want to replace it with. So let's press hi. Let's run this. Oh, I have to write replace. Now it should work. So hi everyone. You see our hello has been replaced with hi. We can also count the occurrence of certain characters in a given string by using the count function. So let's call our variable. Let's run it. Oh no, let's just make a new variable. So let's say x equals hello everybody. Hope all is well. And let's run this. And now let's call our variable and use our count function to find out the amount of times there is a e in our string. So let's write e and run this, and you see that there's 5 e's. We can also use it to count whole words. So let's say we want to get how many times all is in our string. We write all. Let's run this, and you see it's 1. Now let's move on to lists. And the list is a collection of different data type and is created inside block brackets. And the properties of a list is that it is mutable and it allows duplicated values or items in it. So let's make a list. We call our list countries. And in between block brackets, we write our countries: Namibia, Angola, Zambia, and South Africa. Let's run this and let's call our list of countries. Let's run and you see our list. So to check the data type, we write our type function, countries, and let's run this. We see that it tells us that it's a list. To access elements in a list, we use the index number. So to do this, we call our variable countries, and in between block brackets, we write the index number. So let's say if we wanted to get Angola, indexing starts with 0, 1, 2, 3. So Angola would be 1. And let's run this, and we get the index that we called. We can also do negative indexing, and what that does is count backwards. So if we wanted South Africa, we would put -1, Zambia -2, -3, and so on. So let's try this. Let me just do it here. -1, and we should get South Africa. -2, Zambia. Let's say if we wanted to print our list on top of each other, let's write print. We call our variable countries where we have our list stored. We put 0. Let's just copy and paste this. And we call our indexing. So 1 would be Angola, 2 would be Zambia, 3 would be South Africa. Let's run this, and you see we get all our lists on top of each other. Now let's move on to slicing. And let's say we want to call out variables or call out items in our list. We can use slicing. And what slicing does, we have to call out the index number where we want to start and stop. So let's call our countries variables so we don't need to keep scrolling up. Countries. And let's say we want to get from Namibia to Zambia. So let's write countries. And then we want to start from the first index, which is Namibia, and stop at Zambia, 0, 1, 2. But we'll have to add 3 so that it includes Zambia. So 3. And let's run this, and you see we get Namibia, Angola, and Zambia. If we want to add an item to a list, we use the append function. So let's do this. Let's call out our countries variable dot append. And let's say we want to add Zimbabwe. Let's run this and let's call our countries again. And you see Zimbabwe was added to our list. So let's say we want to insert values at a given index. We use the insert function. So let's say we want to insert St. Lucia in the index of Angola. So let's call out our countries variable dot insert, and the insert function takes in 2 variables, which is the index where we want to put our new item. So we want to put it in place in the second index, so we put 1. And then the next argument is whatever we want to put in our index. So let's put St. Lucia. Let's run this. Let's call out countries. And you see St. Lucia was placed in the first index. So let's say we want to concatenate two lists. So before we do that, let's create another variable. Countries2 equals Ghana. So we have to put it in between block brackets. So Ghana, Liberia, Libya. Let's run this. So let's concatenate these two lists. So we write countries plus countries2. And let's run this. Then you see we get a list of both of our countries. To remove items from our list, we use the remove function. So let's call countries again. Let's run this, and let's say we want to remove Zimbabwe. We write countries dot remove, and then it takes the parameter of whatever item we want to remove, which is Zimbabwe. Let's run this. Call out countries, and you see Zimbabwe was removed. If we want to sort elements in a list, we use the sort function. So let's call our countries where we have our list stored dot sort, and let's run this. Let's call out our countries, and let's run this, and you see it sorted our items in alphabetical order. We can also update values in a list. And just to update values in a list, we simply call our variable where we have our list stored, and then in block brackets we put the index number of the item that we want to change. So let's say we want to change Angola to Botswana. We put the index of 0 because indexing starts with 0. And then we set that equals to Botswana. Let's run this. Let's call our countries list, and you see Angola was changed to Botswana. Now let's move on to tuples or tuples. And a tuple is a collection of different data types inside of regular brackets. And each element or value of a tuple is called an item. So let's create a tuple. Say tuple 1 is equals to, let's put some names and integers inside our tuple. James, Chris, Sally, John, 12, 23, 44. And let's call out our tuple. And you see we get the items in our tuple. Let's use the type function to check the data type of our function. And it should tell us that it's a tuple. Something you should know, if there's only one item in a tuple, so let's say variable tup, apple. And let's call the type of what we just created. You see it's called a string. And if there's one item, we need to add a comma. And then now this should change into a tuple. Let's run this and you see that it's a tuple. So let's talk about indexing in a tuple. And let's say if you want to get Chris, we call the index number that corresponds to the item. So, indexing starts with 0. So we start with 0, 1. So Chris would be 1. So let's call our top 1 variable. And we want to get Chris. So in between block brackets, we put 1. Let's run this and we get Chris. We can view a range of items in our tuple. So let's say tuple 1. And let's say we want to get from the first, from James, which is 0. And then we want to get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Say we want to get from James to 23. And you heard me count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if we want to include 23, we have to go one more. So it will be 6. So let's write 6. And we see we get James to 23. If we had got 5, it wouldn't include our 23. To view beginning to the end, we write 0. And then after this, we don't have to put anything. It will just bring up the rest of items in the tuple. And here you see it does that. Now let's move on to sets. And sets are used to store multiple items in single variables. So let me write set. And it stores multiple items. And it is created with curly brackets. So let's create a set. X equals curly bracket. Let's just add a bunch of random numbers. And let's check the type of the variable we created, assigned our set to. And you see it's a set. Let's say we want to add an item to a set. We use the add function. So let's say we want to add a string to this. Let's say we want to add someone's name. So we add x.add. And then let's add Bertha. Now let's run this. Let's call out x. And you see we get Bertha. To delete an item in a set, we use the remove function. And just comment this out. So let's call our variable x.remove. And let's remove Bertha. Let's run this. Let's call out our x. And you see Bertha was removed. Now let's move on to dictionaries. And dictionaries is used to store data values in key and value pairs. So let's do an example to show this. Let's set y equals to, and it also is stored between curly brackets. So y is equal to, let's set our key, which is John. And our value, we give him a value of 33. Let's add another key pairs values. Let's do Matthews. And give him a value of 30. Let's do Sally. Give her a value of 44. And let's run this. And let's check the data type of what we just set to y. And it should give us a dictionary. There you go. And one thing about dictionaries is that it doesn't allow duplicated keys, but we can enter duplicated values. So let's say we want to add another Sally here. Set that to something. So let's just print out. And you can see it omits keys that are duplicated. But if a key has the same value, it will still print. Let's execute. And we need to execute this first. And now this, we could see that it allows duplicated values, but not duplicated keys. To get the value of a key in a dictionary, we use the .get function. So let's bring in our dictionary .get, and let's say we want to get Matthew. Then we'll get the 33, which is the value for that key. To show all the keys in the dictionary, we use the .keys function. So let's call in our variable .keys and run this. Oh, we have to add our brackets and we get the keys. We can do the same with the values, y.values, and we'll only get the values. And to delete a key along with its value, we use the .pop function. .pop function. So let's run y.pop, and it takes one argument, which is the key. Let's say we want to delete John. In single quote, double quotes, we write John. Let's run this. Let's call our y function, our dictionary, and you see that John was deleted. Now let's move on to arithmetic operators. And arithmetic operators are used with numeric values to perform common mathematical operations. And some of the operators that we have is addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, modulus. And what modulus does is gives us the remainder. We have exponent and floor division, which gives us the answer without a decimal. So let's create two values and practice with some arithmetic operators. So we create A equals 15, B equals 3. Let's run this. So let's do the addition operator. So A plus B. We should get 18. Let's do the subtraction. A minus B. Let's run this. We get 12. A times B. Run this. We get 45. A divided by B. Actually, B. We get 5. And the modulus is the remainder we get when we divide. So A modulus B. We get 0 because there's no remainder. Now let's put A to the B power. So 15 to the third power. And we get 3,375. And the floor division gives us the answer without a decimal. Let's run this. And we get 5. So now let's move on to assignment operators. spelling is wrong. Assignment operators. And the assignment operators is used to assign values to variables. So we've been working with the assign operators all along. So A equals 5. We print A and we will get 5. But now let's move on to the add and assign. So we have A and we want to add and assign 4 to it. And this is the same as saying A equals A plus 4. We're assigning 4 to A. So let's run this. Let's print out A. And we got 9. We can do the same with multiply and assign. So let's say x equals 2. And we want to multiply and assign 3. And this is the same as x equals x times 3. Let's call out our x and you get the gist. We can do the same thing with division and subtraction. Now let's move on to comparison operators. And comparison operators is used to compare two values. And some of the comparison operators that we have is equal to, not equal to, our greater than and less than signs, our greater than or equal to, and our less than or equal to. So let's assign some integers to variables. So we gave A equals 5 and A equals 10. And let's find out if A equals, let's change this to B. Let's find out is A is equals to B. And let's run this. And you see we get a false. Let's see if A is not equals to B. We should get a true. Let's see if A is greater than B. Let's run this, we get false. If A is less than B, we run this, we get true. Let's see if A is less than or equal to B, we get true. Let's see if A is greater than or equal to B, we get false. And this is a brief rundown about comparison operators. Now let's move on to logical operators. And logical operators are used to combine conditional statements. And logical operators are and the and operator returns true if both statements are true. We have the or, and the or operator returns true if one of the statements are true, and then we have not. It returns false if the result is true, and returns true if the result is false. So let's create a variable A equals 15. And let's just give this a small a. And we want to find out is if A is equal to 5 and A is less than 15. So let's run this and we get false. So now let's use the OR operator and it returns true if only one of the statements is true. So it's A greater than 5 or A greater than 15. So is A 15 greater than 5? This is true. But is A less than 15? This is false. A is equals to 15. So we're gonna get a true because the OR operator returns true if only one of the statements separated by or is true. So let's run this and we get true. Now let's try the not operator. And we said the not operator returns false if the results is true, and it returns true if the results is false. So let's say not, and in bracket we put a is less than 10. Let's say a is less than 20. So we put a is less than 20, and this is true. But it's going to do the opposite because we used the not operator. And let's run this, and it gives us false. Now let's move on to if-else statements. And the if statements run a code if a certain condition is true. If the condition is not true, then it executes the codes in the else statements. So let me show you by doing an example. Let's say we create a variable called value, and we set that equals to 100. And with our if statements, we have to write if and call our variable we just set value. And let's say if the value is more than 20, we write a colon, and then we press enter. And then we write whatever code we want to execute if the value is more than 20. So the code that we want to execute is print the value is greater than 20. Notice that after our condition, the next line we have to press tab and create indentation, and then we can put the code in that we want to execute. Let's execute this, and it tells us that the value is greater than 20 because the condition is true. So let me just copy and paste this, and we'll do the else statement. And the else statement execute a code if the condition is not true. So let's press enter. And when we're writing the else, we have to write it in line with our if. So else, and we write our colon. We press enter, and we make sure that there's an indentation. So if the condition is false, we want to print this value is not greater than 20. And let's run this. Actually, let's make our value a little bit smaller so it's not greater than 20. And let's run this, and it executes our else statement. Let's do another example. So we want to set password to 1212. And then we create an if statement. So if password is equals 1212, we want to execute a code. Remember, we have to indent. Oh, and also don't forget we need the colon. So let's print access granted. And if the code is not equals to the password, we write our else statement, our colon, and then we print access denied. So let's run this, and we get access granted. Save the password is not 212. Let's run this, and we set access denied. Let's get access granted. Now let's move on to the elif statement. And the elif statement is used to check for multiple conditions. So let's check the eligibility for someone to buy a drink. So let's set a variable, age is equals to 19. And then we write our if. So if age is less than or equal to, if age is greater than or equal to 21, we want to execute print you are old enough to buy a drink. And now let's do our elif statement. Elif, if the age is greater than or equal to 18, we write our colon, we press enter, and it will already do the indentation for us. And we want to print you are old enough to join the military, but not old enough to drink. And if both the if statement and the elif statements is not true, we want to print our else statement, and we just want to say you are too young to drink. So we have our age is 19, and let's see what happens when we run the age of 19 in our function. We get our elif statement, and we can have multiple elif statements. So let's say if the person is above 21, let's run this. You're old enough to buy a drink. Let's say if they're young, 15, you're too young to buy a drink. Now let's move on to functions. And a function is created with a function name, followed by, and in front of that, we have to use the def, which defines our function. So this is called user-defined functions. But we've been working with other functions like print, length, count, and so on. These are called built-in functions. And what we're going to look at is user-defined functions. So let's see how we make our user-defined functions. So we have to use the define keyword, and let's call this our function. We'll just call it FNC, and then we use brackets. Then after that, we have to use a colon, and then we want to specify what we want this function to do. So we want this function to print. This is our first function. So let's execute this, and nothing happened. Because for our function to work, we need to call it. And to call our function, we just type this. So let's copy this, and let's run it. And you see, it executed our function that we created. Let's move on to defining a function with one argument. So let's define a function. Let's call this function new. And let's put a variable x in here. And what we want this function to do is print x. Let's run this. And then now let's call our function new. And we can pass in whatever variable we want for x. So we could write 3, and we will get 3. We can also write a string. This is a string, run, and it will print. This is a string. Now let's create a function with 2 arguments. So let's create a function called divide that divides 2 numbers. So let's create our function. And we're going to give it the name div. And we're going to pass 2 parameters. Let's pass x and y. And then we set our colon. We press enter. It's going to indent for us. And then what we want to do, we're going to set z equals x divided by y. And then next we have to type return z, which is going to return the results of the function. So let's run this. So let's call our function div, and let's say we want to divide 20 and 4. Let's run this. We should get 5. Let's do another example. Let's create a function that multiplies 3 numbers. So we define m, and we call our function mult. And let's give it the arguments a, b, c. And then we write our semicolon. And then we print what we want to happen. So we want to create a new variable equals d and set that equals to a times b times c. And then we're going to return d. And return d is going to return the results of our function. So let's run this. Let's call our function. And we can place values for each of our variable. So let's say we want to multiply 2 times 3 times 4. So a is going to go in, 2 is going to substitute for a, 3 is going to substitute for b, 4 is going to substitute for c. And now let's run this. Oh, our mistake here. Remember I said variables are case sensitive. So here I have a capital C and here I have a lowercase c. So let's change this into a lowercase c and let's run, and it should work. And let's run this cell and we get 24. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 4 is 24. Now let's move on to the lambda function. And the lambda is used to create our own single line functions in a quick way. And the syntax, let me just write the syntax. So let's create a variable. Then we set that equals to lambda. Then we put our arguments, a, b, our colon, and then the operation you want performed. So let me just break this down more. A and b is the arguments of the function, and a plus b, a plus b is the operation performed on the arguments. So let's define a function that adds 2 numbers using lambda. So let's create a variable add, write lambda, x, y, our colon, and then we write what we want to happen. So x plus y. And now let's run this and let's call our function. And we want to add 11 and 33. And let's run this. See, we get 44. Let's do the same example we did with the functions, and let's multiply three numbers. So mul equals lambda x y z colon, and the operation we want to multiply all three numbers. So x times y times z. Let's run this. And let's multiply some numbers. So for x we're putting in 2, for y we're putting in 3, for z we're putting in 4, and we should get 24. Oh, and you could see our error here. Capital Z and lowercase z. Variables, as I said before, variables are case sensitive. So now let's run this top cell and run this one, and we get 24. Let's define a lambda function that prints a string. So let's create a variable called string. We call our lambda function x colon, then we write print x, and then we could set x equal to, this is our lambda tutorial, and let's call string our string. Let's run this, and you see this is our lambda tutorial. And we can also pass any string in our function. So let's type st and say this is another string. Let's run this, and you see we can pass anything into our function. Now let's move on to the for loop. And the for loop is used to iterate over a sequence of items like lists, tuples, sets, etc. So let me explain using an example. So to initiate our for loop, we have to write the for keyword, and let's call it our variable x in, and let's create a list. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then we have to put a colon. Next on the next line, for for loops, indentation is mandatory. So to loop through our list, we have to print x. So what this is saying for x in, meaning x is 1, x is 2, x is 3. So we're going to print the whole list. So let's print x, and let's run this. And you see we loop through our list. Let's loop through a list of strings. So let's say cities is equal to, in our first city we're going to put as Windhoek, Cape Town, Joburg, and and New York. So let's initiate our for loop function. So we write for, and we want to put city. Notice that these are two different variables. We're creating another variable called city. And then we write in cities, which is this variable up here. We want to loop through this list. We write our colon, and on the next line with indentation, we print city. And let's run this. And you see we loop through our list. Let's do one more example. Let's multiply each element of a list by 2. So we create our list. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. So we say for x, we're creating a variable x in our list. We want to multiply each list by 2. So x represents each list. So we set x equals to x times 2. And then we print x. Let's run this. And you see 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, and so on. Now let's talk about while loops. And a while loops repeat a block of code as long as a certain condition is true. So in a while loop, first we have our initiator. Let's set this I variable to 0. And then we have our condition. And we need to write while and then our condition. So while I is less than 5, let's put in our colon. We want to print I. And then we need to increment this variable, because if we don't increment this variable, the loop will go on forever. So I equals I plus 1. And let's run this. We loop through values 0 to 4. So basically what this is doing is while 0 is less than 5, we're going to print I. And then we're incrementing I. So 0 is less than 5, so we're going to print 0. And here you have 0. And then we're going to increment. So it's going to say 1 is less than 5, so we're going to print. And then we're going to increment I plus 1, which gives us 2. And then we're going to take 2 is less than 5, so we're going to print I. And then we're going to add 1 to 2, which changes this to 3. And then it's going to keep going until we reach to 5. So 5 is not less than 5. So our while loop is going to stop. Let's do another example and print a string 5 times. So all we have to do here is delete this. Then we call our print function. And we want to write, this is looping messages 5 times. And let's run this. And you see it printed out our message 5 times. Let's do another example and let's count by 5 to 30. So we're gonna start our initiator at 0. Then we call our while keyword. While x is less than or equals to 30. We write our colon. We're gonna print x. And then we're going to increment x by 5. So set x equals to x plus 5. And let's run this. And you see we counted to 30 by 5. Now let's move on to the break statement. And the break statement is a loop control statement which can be used in both for loops and while loops. And we use the break statement when there is a need to stop the loop at a given condition. So let's set a list of countries. Set that equals to Namibia, Angola, Barbados, St. Lucia. Let's do 2 more countries. Guyana and Ghana. let's run this. So now let's do the break statements in for loops. So for X in our countries, where we put our list, we want to print X, and then we're going to say if X equals St. Lucia, we're going to set another colon, and then we're going to write in our break keyword. So what is this is going to do is going to loop through each list until it gets to St. Lucia, and then it's going to stop. So let's run this, and you see when it gets to St. Lucia, it stops. It doesn't print the rest of the list. Now let's look at break statements and while loops. And with the break statements and while loops, we can stop the loop even if the condition is true. So let's create our while loop. Let's set our initiator at 1. So while 1 is less than 5, press our semicolon. We want to print I. And if I is equals to 3, we want to break, meaning that once it gets to 3, we're going to stop. And then we need to increment I by whatever values we want. Let's increment it by 1. Now let's run this, and you see it loops through and it stops at 3. Now let's move on to the continue statement. And with the continue statement, we can stop the current iteration of loop and continue with the next iteration. This just means that we can skip items in a list. So let's go back and get this country list here. Countries list. Let's copy. Paste this. Let's run this. And now let's run a for loop. So for X in countries, we want to say if X is equals to Barbados, we will say continue. And then we call our print function in line with the ifs. So let's print X, and let's run this. So you see it loops through every item, and when it gets to Barbados, our continue function kicks in, and then it skips Barbados and moves on to the next one. And remember our continue statements, it needs to be before the print statements, otherwise our loop won't work. So let's move on to continue statements in while loops. So let's create a loop. Let's set our initiator. Let's call our while X is less than 5. We want to set X equals to X plus 1. Then if X is equals to 3, we're gonna continue and then print X. And also in our while loop, the continuous statement should be before the print statement. Otherwise, our loop won't work. So let's run, and you see it skips 3 because we use our continue statement.